In the heart of Central Asia lies Afghanistan, a land steeped in rich history and resilience, but also marked by struggle. For decades, the narrative surrounding Afghan women has been shaped by the geopolitical turbulence of the region, often oversimplified, misrepresented, and misunderstood. This video is an attempt to peer into the complexities of Afghan women's lives, examining the perceptions versus the harsh realities that they face.
Historically, Afghan women were on the cusp of significant progress in the late 20th century. The 1960s and 70s witnessed a burgeoning of educational opportunities and a gradual awakening of women's rights. During this period, women began stepping into the public sphere and advocating for their rights. Afghan women's history is not just one of subjugation, it is also of resistance and leadership. Queen Soraya Tarzi in the early 20th century pushed for reforms that would give Afghan women unprecedented rights. Under King Amanullah, child marriage was banned, polygamy was discouraged, and the veil became optional. Soraya herself publicly tore off her veil as a symbol of emancipation, and her actions led to lasting reforms in education, healthcare, and legal protection for women. It is important to note that these reforms were driven not by Western forces, but by Afghan women and leaders themselves, debunking the idea that gender equality in Afghanistan must come from external intervention.
However, this progress was abruptly halted with the rise of the Mujahideen and the subsequent Taliban regime in the late 1990s. The Taliban imposed a strict interpretation of Sharia law, severely restricted women's rights. They banned education, employment, and even the right to leave their homes without a male guardian. The world watched in horror as the media depicted Afghan women as victims in need of saving from their oppressive circumstances. This narrative resonated deeply in the West, where policymakers and activists positioned themselves as liberators. We must intervene, they said, to restore freedom and autonomy to these women. But this perspective often oversimplified the nuanced realities of Afghan women's lives. After the US invasion in 2001, Afghan women began to reclaim their rights, participating in elections, filling classrooms, and holding positions in government. The international community heralded these developments as triumphs of liberation. Yet, amidst the euphoria of newfound freedoms, the complexities of their experiences often went unaddressed. The perception that Afghan women were universally oppressed belied the diverse realities of their lives. Many women embraced the changes, yet some remained caught between tradition and modernity, negotiating their identities in a rapidly shifting landscape. This tension is further compounded by the complexities of autonomy and choice. Autonomy isn't something you achieve and possess passively. It is something you must consciously engage with.
In discussions around autonomy, the concept of adaptive preferences as given by Martha Nussbaum comes into play. The argument that builds itself on the philosophy forwarded by Amartya Sen, wherein she thinks of political goal as a capability instead of a function, thus directly challenging the government's paternalism as choice is considered as a good thing. She argues that women may internalize oppressive norms, rationalizing their circumstances and believing that they have no better options, which can lead to the perception of lacking autonomy. This notion suggests that women who accept their circumstances without complaint are victims of their socialization, a position that undermines their agency.
However, this perspective isn't without its criticism. Women are not merely brainwashed by patriarchy. They often engage in critical reflection, well aware of their situation and their standing in society. This awareness reflects in their decisions as well, because complying to traditional norms isn't mutually exclusive with survival in a complex reality. Women who don't complain don't automatically resign to their lives with no agency. They merely exercise the notion that their rights, their freedoms, and their choices are limited. And with this mindset, they operate in a system understanding the consequences of their actions. This dichotomy reveals a critical flaw in the adapted preference theory. It overlooks the fact that women can possess agency while also participating in oppressive structures. For instance, many Afghan women navigate cultural expectations with the understanding that compliance can yield tangible benefits for themselves and their families.
Oppression is complex, and individuals make choices that may seem contradictory. Women can be critical of the norms they adhere to while still navigating their lives within those frameworks. They may experience internal conflicts about the acceptability of cultural standards, yet they remain rational agents in their decision making processes. Recognizing women's autonomy entails acknowledging their agency in choosing to comply with patriarchal norms.
Farkhunda Malikzada's lynching in 2015 exemplifies the interplay of autonomy and oppression in Afghanistan. By confronting a mullah selling amulets, Farkhunda exercised her agency and critical reflections. However, her actions led to brutal mob response, highlighting the precarious nature of women's autonomy in patriarchal contexts. Following her death, reactions varied among Afghan women. While many protested for justice, some rationalized her fate as a consequence of defying male authority.
It becomes clear that the intersection of race, class, and gender cannot be ignored when discussing the autonomy of women in Afghanistan. The lens through which we view their choices must take into account the historical context and ongoing socio-political struggles they face. The voices of Afghan women must be amplified, not silenced or dismissed as victims. They have a wealth of insight and experience to share that challenge the monolithic narratives often presented in Western discourse.
Respecting women's autonomy means acknowledging their ability to make informed choices while remaining critical of the oppressive structures that shape those choices. This is the fine line between the perception we attribute to and the reality that an Afghan woman interacts with and exists in. This perspective encourages a dialogue that fosters understanding and respect rather than paternalism. It reminds us that autonomy is not a binary state but a spectrum of experiences influenced by a myriad of factors, including socio-cultural context and personal agency.
As we reflect on the perception versus realities of Afghan women, it becomes evident that their stories are not monolithic. Each woman's experience is shaped by cultural, social, and political influences. While the Western narrative often poses itself as a savior, it is crucial to recognize the strength and resilience of Afghan women.
Because the fight for autonomy and dignity for Afghan women transcends all borders and cultures. It calls for a collective recognition of the complexities of oppression and a commitment to supporting women in their pursuit of rights, choices, and a future they envision for themselves. Let us engage with these narratives with humility, respect, and an understanding that the fight for women's rights is a shared struggle that transcends cultural boundaries, echoing the universal quest for dignity and autonomy in every corner of the world.